And here we are. Hi.
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 Hello.
I'm Catherine Brown Ramsperger, poet, author, book coach, humanitarian, and teacher. I'm here with the fabulous author and creative Merav Richter. I'm also the creator of Step Into Your Story. I began Story Hour here on my Facebook author page to connect writers and readers, and boy, are we in for a treat today. So before Merav comes on live, I'd like to introduce her. I'm excited because we met when we entered a Hierophant Press Next Best Fiction Author Contest way back in 2013, before either one of us had published a book. Merav and I were both world travelers and spiritualists, and we hit it off right away. Merav was a flight attendant at the time, and she's going to tell you a little bit about that today too. And I had worked internationally for Red Cross, Red Crescent, and Magen David Adom, Israel's national society. We both believe in giving a voice to the voiceless or suppressed. And her kids were a little younger than mine, but we connected that way too, as moms, as working moms. She's gone on to great things. Her first novel won a Hay House Award and was published by them. She's also a two-time TEDx speaker, and that is amazing, 2 times. She's an award-winning best-selling author, and you can find her under the byline E.M. Richter or M. Richter, or I think the last one might have been published with Ella Richter, her daughter, as Merav Richter. Just a tiny bit more, and then we're going to bring her on. Her first book, The Secret of the Storyteller, won a fiction novel contest with Hay House, as I said. Through the promotion and marketing of that book, Merav expanded her expertise and published her second book, Brave Ecstatic Woman, which is nonfiction, self-development, in 2016. She went on to self-publish a book that she co-wrote with 9-year-old daughter Ella called The Search for Maya, which became an instant Amazon bestseller. The mother-daughter dynamic duo set the intention to raise funds and awareness for autism awareness with that book, and then have gone on to even greater awareness. They were able to not only match, but double their goal. In 2019, Merav created and spearheaded the Open Skies for Autism initiative, giving children on the autism spectrum the chance to experience flight without ever leaving the ground. Now that's pretty cool. She intends to continue this initiative as an annual event at every airport in North America. She's coached and mentored notable current authors whose books have helped her to launch the authors. She's helped to launch their careers. Her students and mentees have been published through traditional, hybrid options. They've all become either New York Times, Amazon, or Barnes & Noble bestsellers. That's an accomplishment in and of itself, having that kind of list to your credit. She hosts in-person writing retreats and workshops around the world. I'll bet they're at really cool destinations too. She also loves teaching online through her course, The Game-Changing Book Blueprint. Get my bees out. And I need to mention Merav's advocacy for social reform. She particularly enjoys finding fresh and funny ways to embrace all of life's turbulent moments, which we've had a little bit of during COVID. And she and I had a week that was had a little turbulence, but we're here, and the manifestation fairies came through. Fantastic.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'd just like to officially welcome Merav Richter. Welcome, and you want to say a little something?
Thank you so much, Kathy. That was incredible. I love the way that, yeah, hello. I love your introduction. And I do have to say kudos to you. Like you said, we've known each other since that author group that we were in 2013. We've both come such a long way over the years, and I do have to just take my hat off to you, give you kudos and credit. You are one of the most prepared, on top of it, thorough, deep. I mean, even the list that you sent me ahead of time, like, you are one of the, I mean, really, it's no surprise that you're a journalist. Like, you actually really did your homework and your basis. And it's going to be such a fun interview. I was getting excited over the questions even as you sent them to me. I was like, I can't wait to get into this meaty conversation.
That's exactly what I want, is for the authors I interview to have fun and be excited, and not be worried about tech. And I want less stress and high vibe, and that's what you bring to the stage, Merav.
Less stress, lots of blessed. How about that? Less stress, damn fine in this dress. How about that? Am I right?
Well,
a mug shot for you.
You make me laugh so much. I just love spending time with you.
As do I, Kathy, as do I.
Well, so I want, instead of reading from your books, because I will quote them a few places, but I wanted to read a couple of reviews instead, because your books are experiential. And so to read a little passage wouldn't do them justice. But I think these reviews do. This is about Merav's first novel, The Secret of the Storyteller, which came my way in an interesting way. If one can envision a book as a meal, The Secret of the Storyteller is a satisfying 5-course feast. This book made me hungry for more about her heroine, more about the story's mentor, more about the setting and history of the place, and which is Jerusalem, by the way. Richter's genius, as may be surmised from the title, is in the story. Her characters are brilliantly drawn, the setting vividly described. I agree, I felt right there with you. Her themes were well presented and her plot satisfactorily resolved. She has a masterful command of the language, and the character dialogue is believable and never drags. I want more from this author. Lots more. So do I. And we're getting it.
Wow, that was great.
Well, I didn't even say it. It was
oh, great to hear that. I mean, I should just have you recorded and listen to that on.
Well, you'll get the recording. I know. I love that, right? When you hear something, and on my days when I'm having some issues getting in touch with the divine muse, I go back and read a review. They're the best. And that's
a great tip, actually, Kathy. Look at you starting off to the actual strategies right off the bat. Yeah, that is, you know what? Perfect. And isn't that like the perfect panacea for when you do have, let's say, what they call haters, right? Those people who want to leave a negative comment, and they don't quite know you. They don't know what you're about. And, they just want to come up and you've touched them on a nerve that that is live wire for them. That's all great, because eventually, you need a breakdown to break through, and that's fine. But in that moment, you can't help but really be human. And so what a great strategy to ground yourself and remember, no, I'm actually doing, this is good work I'm doing. I'm actually on the right path.
I have
some people who are getting it.
Because I used to say, I just trigger people too much. My writing can trigger people. And she said,
that's a good thing.
Put on earth to trigger people.
That's a good thing.
It is a good thing. It's really
cheers to that. That's a good thing. Yeah.
Cheers. So cheers.
Yeah.
This is about her most recent book, co-authored, as I said, with your daughter Ella, when she was 9, right?
Yeah.
Searching for Maya.
The search for Maya, yeah.
It's not easy to be different in a world of conformity. Searching for Maya shows us that we must embrace ourselves with all special things we possess. Great insight into a child's mind on the autism spectrum, Excellent first collaboration between mom and daughter. Easy to read, easy to understand. I'm smelling a sequel. I hope so. So before we get into all your wonderful storytelling, please tell us about your whole career and how you've become Wonder Woman, just like you dreamed of when you were a little girl.
So yeah, I'm going to give you myself in a nutshell, but it has to be a pretty big nut, like a coconut-sized nutshell. And I am a little coconut, so it's okay. I started actually, so when I was 18, I was actually a really rebellious teenager and got into a little bit of trouble. And as part of my punishment, social kind of reform, I was sent to Israel. And I joined Amnesty International as a peacemaker. And that's when I actually, I spent time, I was actually stationed at the Rafah crossing, and I understood, I was trained by a brilliant man. I still consider him a role model to this day. He went on and left Amnesty to go on to run IONS, the Institute of Noetic Sciences. So it just goes to show you, I mean, he didn't run Amnesty as a NGO. He ran it as like a spiritual peace organization. And that's actually the pseudonym M came from that time. And that's a whole other story, but stay in my coconut here for a minute. When I came back to Canada, which is where I lived at the time, and my mom was still alive at the time. So I entered my first year of university, and by October, I was just like, oh, I'm an alien. I don't belong here. I mean, these girls are talking about who's dating who and whose lip gloss matches and what's on sale. And this does not resonate. I just came back from a war zone. I was just a peacemaker, like, and I thought I was going there to make peace between, peace in the Middle East. I ended up making peace within myself, and came back to this world that just, I didn't speak the same language. And that was October, and my mom, who, as I said, was still alive then, saw this newspaper clipping, this ad that the airline was looking for flight attendants. And she called me and she said, do you remember when you were a little kid, what you wanted to do? And I said, there were only two things I ever wanted to do: be a stewardess, because when I was a kid, I had a lisp, and that's what flight attendants were called, stewardess, and a writer. Those were my two things. Wow. I never answered anything different. And over the years, anyway, so she said, like, they're hiring stewardesses, flight attendants for the airline. And so I was 18 and I joined the airline. By the time I started in that initial training, I was 19, but had a full and beautiful career with them, and was able to, I did go on to finish university, but just not in the conventional way, and but went on to travel around the world as a flight attendant. And that's actually kind of brings us fast forward. I went on to have 3 kids, and I enjoyed my job, loved my job, but I put this dream of that other part, right? I wanted to be a stewardess and a writer. So I put the writer on the back burner until 2012. So there was this thing that had happened to me, that happened in Jerusalem on a layover, that I'd been tinkering with the whole time. And anytime I would share that story with someone, they would go, oh, that needs to be a book. And so I started, every time I would go on layover, I would actually go to Jerusalem and study under a female teacher. And I studied the Tree of Life and Kabbalah and feminine spirituality. And then I went around other places, in my job, right? Came home and was with my kids, but then I would go for 2 days to the south of France or to Peru or to Jerusalem or, all around the world. And I would always seek out these mystical schools and I would study them. And in 2012, I started writing the story, The Secret of the Storyteller. And in 2013, I entered it in a couple of contests, one of which I shared with you, and won a contract. And in part of the education around how to promote and market a book, I was sent to book promotions and, these weekends and was taught all about picking up a theme from the book, which mine was feminine spirituality, you know, even in a fiction book, that these are the ways that you put your building blocks for promotion and for marketing. So
Right.
I started, so I started to create a Facebook page. And from the Facebook page, I would put all these elements around really stepping into your femininity. And this was 2013. I mean, this was on the leading edge of this huge revolution and goddess movement, sort of that kind of talk. And so I started to really do the research so that I could write, right? And basically blog and Facebook and do that promotion. And by 2016, all of that information actually, you know, people were asking me for a nonfiction book. So the fiction book had these concepts that were introduced in a storytelling capacity, then the nonfiction book coming out and introducing these concepts now in a, you know, in a nonfiction, right? In a tangible, real life. My friend called it applied philosophy because she called it self-help, and I went, no, please, not self-help, not self-help. I don't want to be a self-help author, but applied philosophy. How do you apply these philosophies to your real life? And that was in 2016.
Talk.
Yeah, exactly. And that was in 2016. And then in 2018, when Ella was 9, so she had been watching me write these books since she was 3. So when she was 9, she turned to me and she said, Mama, I want to write a book with you. And, you know, and I was like, oh, great. And she said, but not one of those that you tie with the ribbon. No, I want the front cover, the back cover, the acknowledgement, the book launch. I want the works. I want the storyboard. I want to do what I've seen you doing for my whole life. And so I was thrilled because here I am empowering women, and my number one woman. I was like, of course. Like,
that's every mom's dream, right? For their daughter to, well, for their daughter to find their path first and foremost.
Right.
But
right.
if it happens to be anything having to do with your own, it's such a yeah.
Well, and I won't. You know, there's no pressure on her if she chooses to go other paths down the line. But for that time being,
it was time.
Right. And now let's also keep in mind another vantage point is that she is on the autism spectrum. And the way autism presents in girls is very different than how it presents in boys. And so without going into, you know, at the time she was 9, she had already kind of come out of, she had learned tools and coping mechanisms for the things that previous years used to, you know, really present a challenge with her. But here is for a little girl who has some social or communication blocks. You know, her and I wrote we actually wrote the book in July of 2018, published it in August. As you mentioned, it became a bestseller on the day that, you know, instant. It was on the day it became a bestseller. And we had our formal book launch in September. But by the time she came back to school in September over that summer, she had left school in grade 3 as this sort of shy, awkward, not really speaking girl that sometimes used to have these, you know, what she calls freakouts because if it was too loud or too crowded.
The book describes that so well.
Right. And she came back to school, you know, this like over the summer as this like not a weird girl, she's an author. Right, so it's a best-selling author, right? So it's no longer that same identity. She had this sort of. There's a reason now that I don't communicate. You know, I don't communicate in the same way. I'm not weird. I'm an author. So I thought that shifted her identity. And as you said, we raised over $10,000 on the weekend that we launched it for Autism Speaks, and then. The airline that I work for actually brought me in to rewrite the whole SOPs, the manual, the standard operating procedure for how we have passengers with invisible disabilities. And that got into this whole training, and that same manual got used everywhere in all the other airports, training staff throughout the whole airline environment and airports. And then the beauty of that is that then opened the door that when I wanted my daughter's best friend Angelica came over, and I somehow promised her that I would find a way to get her onto a flight that doesn't take off. And that's how the idea for Open Skies for Autism came up. And now, of course, there's a pause in that, but my commitment is with that intention, with that initiative, my intention is to have that little simulation flight around the airport. So, just taxiing around the airport. So everything to do with flight without ever leaving the ground. My intention is that will happen in every airport, at least in North America for now. And then after that, I'm setting my sights on everywhere in the world. So.
That is just a story of a miracle. My own children are not autistic, but one has ADHD and the other one has dyslexia.
Yeah.
And is very introverted, which is not a bad thing. It's just he's very creative and would rather be editing a film than talking with a person.
Right.
Right. I just think that things like that only can help both the airlines and the passengers, all the passengers.
Yeah.
And he has a friend who has Asperger's. It's his best friend. They spent college together even. They've known each other since they were 5. And to have that knowledge when he would get on a plane and it wasn't there, by the way, until you created it. So thank you so much. I want to make absolutely certain we get to a few more questions, but you have covered a lot of what I already asked.
In the coconut, huh?
Yeah, in the coconut. I want one very short question. What age were you when you knew you wanted to write? And did your desire to travel mesh with it, or did you move into, and I can't say it the cute way you said it. I used to talk like that. I used to say, winkled my wug. That boy winkled my wug. But so I get it. Were they always side by side, or did one overtake the other? And how did that happen?
It's funny. I actually kind of talked about this in my TEDx called The Full Spectrum, about how my daughter's autism had me realize that a lot of my childhood made sense. And of course, we didn't diagnose at the time, but I'm sure if we would have diagnosed, I would have probably been diagnosed with autism because I didn't speak, but I did write. So I always knew. But I
with ADHD. Absolutely. Yeah.
So I always knew that writing was an outlet for me. I always knew that when I held a pen, something magical happens, and it was like I went into a vortex, like, and the power of the written word. And I love to read also, and of course, as Stephen King says, like, good writers are readers, right? The more you read, the better you are at writing. So I was always an avid reader. So I always knew that writing was my thing. In fact, actually funny that my mug says "write on." My vice principal of high school signed my graduating yearbook with "write on."
That's really cool.
And it was like prophetic in a sense. But then I actually had a counselor in high school. I actually wanted to start being a flight attendant on my very first flight. I remember it was KLM, and the ladies looked so done up and beautiful, and they had this little chignon, and they looked so elegant. And I remember just like doe-eyed looking at them like they were magical fairies. And I remember I wasn't a doll. I wasn't a girly girl. I was a tomboy. And so I didn't have a single Barbie type of doll. I mean, much less Barbie, the actual Barbie doll. But I did really want, they had it in their duty-free catalog, this KLM Barbie, right, with her little uniform. And I fell in love with that. And I asked my mom to buy it. And my mom looked at me sort of side-eyed because I'd never been interested in dolls before, but that one. And I always played flight attendant all around the world, right? I have, but the world was really important to me. And so that was when kind of that dream was born. I specifically remember the seed of when that got planted in me. And years later, I had a counselor in high school who said to me when I said, like, she said, what do you want to be when you grow up? But I remember her being kind of surly, like, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, oh, I want to be a stewardess. She goes, oh, well, that's nice, dear. That's nice. You do that when you're young, and then you go on to pursue a more academic career. What is the academic career, like the reality career? What would you like to study? And I said, oh, well, then I want to be a writer. And she said, oh, well, that's nice, dear. Very nice. You do that after you've had your real career, when you have something to speak about. So what really do you want to study? What do you want? And I said, oh, okay, I want to be a philosopher. And she goes, well, now we're getting somewhere. That's an academic pursuit. What kind of philosopher would you like to be? And I said, oh, well, Greek? I don't know. What kind of philosophers are there? Turns out now I'm an applied philosopher. How about that? So I did study philosophy actually after that, but yeah, not a huge market for philosophers, is there?
No,
I'm a
not
philosophizing
a
flight
huge
attendant.
market anymore for academics at all. And though I obviously went that route, I got the opposite of how are you going to make money doing this? That was my parental. My mother wanted me to write, but like in addition to.
Right.
So I get it. Oh boy, that's a beautiful story about how our children need to carve their own paths, and gradually the world is listening to them because of people like Ella that write books.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your first novel, as you well know, caught me from beginning to end. It follows the magical journey of Selena Silver, a naive young flight attendant, as she finds herself embroiled in a Jerusalem uprising. Seeking refuge from the riots, she hides in the home of Sophia, a mystical oracle who reveals to her ancient secrets and equally hidden political agendas. This long-lost knowledge has the power to shift the paradigm of humanity into a new era of peace, possibility, and hope. I almost said policy because I wish it was a new world of policy.
Yeah.
But first we need possibility.
Right.
So I felt this entire time that you must have just soaked this book in and channeled it back out. And the reason I loved it so much, aside from its story, was because we both write about the changing paradigm of conflict versus peace. Mine takes place in Beirut and yours in Jerusalem, but I used to say if we can bring peace to the Middle East, the world will be at peace.
Right.
One reviewer calls your novel esoteric and a story within a story within a story within a story. And were you already answered if you were inspired to write it when you were in Israel, because you were. And really, you told us about how Israel affected you and your spiritual outlook too. But maybe you could talk a little bit more about the mystical elements in the novel, about Sophia, who I suppose is modeled after your mentor there. And do you think there'll ever be a sequel? That question while I check.
Great, I'd love that. Yeah, I got so excited. It sent tingles up my spine. 100%. I am very enthusiastically looking to follow that up. In fact, when I first wrote it, it actually is the first in a trio. And I kind of got sidelined over, as I mentioned to you, I've been writing as a work of heart. not as my full-time gig. My full-time
Right.
gig was still in the airline. And literally I celebrated my 25th anniversary in May. And I'm very proud of that, and very proud of the work that I've done there too. And talk about shifting paradigms, like in a real world sense. So I wouldn't have given that up for anything. And now with, this gift, this blessing that we've been given, and this great pause, definitely the second book takes place in the south of France. And it is,
Okay.
did that get you
I
excited? Did that
know
get you
that.
excited?
I just can't wait. That's my favorite place on the face of the continent.
So,
Not the continent.
okay.
The universe is what I meant. The
So
continental universe.
I had the opportunity to spend some time there in 2013 actually, yeah. And so the Return of the Rose is actually what that book will be called, and it
That
follows,
sense.
makes sense, right? So that follows the Mary Magdalene
Mm.
story and the legacy, as well as the ley lines, and why is it that she had to leave Jerusalem, and it sort of dovetails um, as Selena grows and matures and grows to understand, she returns back to she looks up, if you remember in The Secret of the Storyteller, I don't know how long ago you read it, but
A while
what put
back,
her,
but I glanced at it again
what
before.
put her in the pursuit of Sophia in Jerusalem was a woman called Natalie on the airplane.
Right.
And so Selena goes on over the years to try to track down Natalie, who was this instigator in her life. And she finds that she's living in the south of France. And so she journeys to the south of France to learn under Natalie Rose about the secret lineage
I am so
of the Magdalene.
excited. If you
Right.
knew how many books of fiction and supposed nonfiction that I've read about Mary Magdalene, you would know I am your ideal reader.
I would love to chat about that and share that.
Yeah.
Yes. And it is going to be also, with all the knowledge that I'll take in and soak up from other people, it's also going to be, I'm going to be there and just let the pen guide me. Let the words find their way to the paper.
That's the best way. That's
Yeah.
the best way. So we do have some comments and a question. You know Marilyn L. Rice.
Sure do. Yeah. From that same contest. It's like the whole gang is back together. Yes.
Hi from across the pond. And then three singing horses together. It's funny because my favorite first book was called The Three Little Horses. That's for you, Marilyn.
There we go.
Tatiana Ramsov, did your daughter actually write her parts of the book, or did you discuss her thoughts and ideas and you put it together? Does your daughter also have a Charlie in her life?
Amazing. That's an amazing question. And actually, specifically, when we wrote the book, I did not want her to look back on it 30 years later and say, my mom said she wrote with me, but that's not the same. Those aren't my words. I wanted to ensure very little editing came into play, especially in her chapters. It takes her longer to type out the words. Of course, she was 9. That's to be expected. But definitely
that much longer if she wrote it. If you guys wrote it, it is a children's book. It's made for children, so it's not 250 pages.
Exactly.
The story is very solid and whole
and concise in that a small amount of time. And I love that you just said that, because a lot of the reviews, of course, that come on Amazon or come from the parents. But what I hear, my daughter has her best friend, a little friend now, also, she's going to be 11 in a couple of weeks. And I overheard them playing. And that little girl, who's also on the autism spectrum, says to my daughter, that book is my favorite book. It's like Maya is my best friend. It's like Maya understands me. And that really is, really the book was really 100% written by Ella for children who, I don't think if I would have written Ella's part and then said that it was in fact Ella's part, it wouldn't have had the same effect on Ella's 9, 10, 12-year-old friends. And a lot of kids at school, she came back to school and a lot of the kids were reading it, and getting, even kids that are what's called NT or neurotypical were coming back and going, I understand it now. I get it now. And she actually was one of the instrumental pieces in raising autism awareness in her school board, because the information that she provided let people really understand what's going on, that overwhelm in someone who has autism, and what's going on when they're having a meltdown.
Even the counselors don't understand learning differences or anything about the autism spectrum.
Right.
And it's up to the parent, and sometimes the parents are mystified, to explain it to the counselor, which is backwards. But and so what she's doing, I think she's going to have a voice in education in the now and into the future.
Yeah,
that's amazing, like miraculously amazing.
Yeah, she's pretty much amazing.
She has an amazingly authentic voice too. I loved this quote the most, and it's from Maya. It was as if all the colors in her brain were all mixed together and she couldn't separate them into their own drawers. I thought, I feel like that myself sometimes.
Right.
But it's a perfect description of what it must be like not to be able to communicate your heart and soul to people. Well, so there's a subgroup I call the muggles. But then there's a subgroup that they're not muggles, right?
Yeah.
But they just don't understand the emotion that's coming out of you, that you can't, because you can't put labels to it. Right. And that really brought tears to my eyes, the way she described it. Mm-hmm. I also love how she is expert at differentiating between Maya's and Charlie's differences and use of language, and the difference in the genders is obviously there too.
That's right.
And only somebody that had gone through it would be able to do that.
That's right.
So congrats to you both. A little bit, let's get back to you though. I'm extremely interested in the assessment that you sent as to sign up for your e-letter, I think it was, and I received it as a result. I already knew I was more creator than any kind of executor kind of person.
Right.
Although I saw myself in a few of the archetypes. And obviously the first step is owning your strengths and weaknesses, but then what? If you're a big picture person and a storyteller, which I think are my two main archetypes, how do you get detail oriented, or do you hire the details out?
I mean, that's completely up to you.
Yeah.
I think hiring out, I think you can do it on a budget. So I'll share with you, I don't want to impose what works for me on someone else, because after all, that works for me, it might not work for someone else. I'll give you a kind of background view and, a bird's eye view of how I came to know those archetypes.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. And then kind of it starts to give a bigger picture. I created an archetype assessment for Brave Ecstatic Woman when I launched that book, and it was one of the sort of sign up for the email. But also it was as I did the research on what femininity is and the cycles of the feminine. We have an archetype from 0 to 7, then we have an archetype from 7 to 14. We have an archetype, right? We shift archetypes, right? Which is why a 45-year-old woman might come and go, look in your closet one day and go, what are these clothes in here? Like, this is not me. Right? Who is this person? Who is this woman? Because something shifts and you're no longer the person that you were the year before, 6 months
Yeah.
before. I have a, I think you can see, I have a tree of life, what in one system we'll call it the chakras, and in another system we'll call it the sephirot, and in other systems we might call it chi. In science we'll call it the endocrinal systems and the hormonal glands, right? Like but we know that there are certain archetypes that we shift into. And as I would work with women during that launch of that book and creating that community around Brave Ecstatic Woman and what that means, one of the biggest things that I found was that women were coming to me for coaching in that, but primarily because it was me, they found solace through writing. That was one of the things that, obviously either they were magnetized and attracted to me, law of attraction coming to me because I find writing as my mode of, like the weapon of mass inspiration, right? So one of the things that as I worked with those women, they would develop their own archetype that was a writer archetype within the general archetype. And I started to see that there was this kind of spectrum of people who are great at communicating themselves in the sense of they're very, very copyright, very punchy, very headline, like they've got hooks. They can hook someone in. And as I started reading and not started reading, I should say, now let me back that up. One of your questions that I was excited to ask about was why I made the leap from fiction to nonfiction. And I'll segue that in now. When I used to only read fiction, fiction was my jam. I liked fiction only. When I was writing fiction in 2012, I could not read fiction because the voice of the narration of whatever I was reading leaked into what I was writing.
You were the only other person I've ever heard say that. I mean, exactly the same. Exactly the same.
So I just stopped any fiction reading and went to nonfiction reading while writing, and then fell in love with the nonfiction style and the framework. So now over the last 7 years, I only read nonfiction. I'll throw in a fiction book once in a while, but really, I really love nonfiction books now. So as I was starting to work with these healers and coaches and speakers and entrepreneurs, and I call it speakers, coaches, and other rebels, right? Or speakers, coaches, entrepreneurs, and other rebels, right? People doing some really cool things in the world. As I was coaching them, it sort of started to bleed into book writing coaching, because giving them that framework and giving them that this as a tool actually empowered them the most that I could ever empower them. And as they started writing out their story or their framework or their philosophy or their process, they started getting invited to run. I have a woman who started running a huge boot camp just from her book. It's a huge corporate boot camp, like in her space. I have another woman who went on to become a Barnes & Noble bestseller and Amazon bestsellers. And so they're just learning their own process, but the empowerment of writing a book. And so as I was doing that, I started realizing that my gift was actually giving them the identity to be a writer. And a lot of times people look at the kind of writer that they like to read and they don't recognize themselves in that.
Right.
And so they discount their own writing ability. And that's the biggest. There are the 6 different archetypes of writer, and all of them are successful. They all have to have their own little strategy, their own little hack. So for instance, Brene Brown is a beautiful orator. She can get up on a stage and speak stories to life. She has that sort of Texan, sit around on the porch telling stories, and you're spellbound.
Right.
And if she were to gauge her writing on sit down in front of a computer and try to write, she would convince herself that she's not an author.
Mm-hmm.
But what she's found is a hack that she gets together whenever she's in the book writing process. She gets together with 2 friends and she orates to them, she tells them, she story tells them these stories, and they write it down. And then when she's finished telling the story, they retell to her what they heard. And now that auditory exchange is her hack, that then she can now write it down based on the salient, parts that they picked up from her, and they're good friends, so she trusts them that they'll bring her, that they'll be sort of keep their ego at the door, and that they won't bring in their voice to it, that they'll mirror back for her voice. So little hacks like that. So on that question of, do you bring someone in? Do you pay someone? I feel like you can really do it on a budget, but you have to know what it is that your style is, that your technique is,
Right.
to be able to know what holes you need to plug.
Right.
And then bring in people to your team.
I'm very, very glad that I asked that question. I agree with everything you said. And again, our journeys just keep meshing, because I have changed over the past 2 years from being an intuitive coach. I don't mean I wouldn't use my intuition to coach somebody.
You couldn't
but
turn it off if you tried.
Because I would see people with amazing stories that would say, but I can't write that. Mm-hmm. But they can.
Right.
Fantastic answer. Thank you so much.
You're very, very welcome. Very welcome.
Okay. I want to talk about a quote from Brave Ecstatic Woman. You say, fear is not the enemy. It is a compass pointing to the areas you need to grow. I totally agree. What would you tell people right now about fear? Not just in times of COVID. I call it COVID cocooning. Somebody said she's going to have a COVID Christmas lately. I said, that's a book title. Anyway,
right.
What would you tell, especially women and women authors who want to set out on their own Shero's journey like you? About fear in particular.
So, yeah, and it's so great. And that's actually Shero's journey is, I know I use it in Brave Ecstatic Woman, and it's a play concept that I've been tinkling with.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, that's, it's amazing because people say fearless, right? And we hold that as like this highest attribute, as being fearless. And that's really a misnomer. There is no such thing as fearless. There is fearless. There is fear, right? Like they say, new level, new devil. Every time you come into a new stage of development, there's a new fear that comes with it. And I am not, right? As I said to you, like I don't purport to be above that. I don't purport to ever come up and look fear in the eye and look it down.
I don't trust anybody that does purport to be that.
Right, because there are things that come up, and sometimes your fear is your greatest compass, right? Like they say, sometimes procrastination is God's direction, right? Redirection, right? Sometimes, like, I have had some things that have happened as I come into kind of like publicized promotion, public life, where I retreat back, going like, no, especially when it comes to my kids. I am a protective mama bear. And so definitely, I think it would be reckless to say, that they're to go.
It's your intuition talking. It's your intuition talking. It's saying, hey.
When things matter to you, like when things matter, they matter, right? So a lot of that whole like sort of mind over matter, sure, yeah, there's a huge indicator for that mind over matter, meaning that your mind is capable of infinite possibilities. But the things that matter still matter. So I always say, Eat, Pray, Love. I love that book. It's a great book, and I loved living vicariously through her. But I call it Eat, Stay, Love. Like that sometimes that we're so looking to leave and go outside of our, we think that we can only achieve the things if we weren't bound down by some things. And I'm here to say that those things that matter to you for a reason. Don't abandon them. Don't think that that means being fearless, or that you should be fearless with everything. There's actually some really great indications for fear. And when you have irrational fear, that's when you need to really look and go, okay, what is my soul trying to up-level me here? Because that's a sign that your soul wants to up-level. That's a sign that karmically you've got some work to do in that area, right? It's when it's an irrational fear, when you go, I don't really know why I'm scared of water. Well, that's the time that you take yourself to the pool and start having some lessons in deep diving, because something's going on there. Or I don't, gosh, I'm really scared of trying that spoken word poetry. Well, that's irrational. What are you scared of?
Yeah.
You're not going to get tarred and feathered when you're on the stage. Those are the kind of fears that you look at and you embrace and you go, something's twinging for me. So you sign up to a Toastmasters and you start giving speeches, and then you incrementally work your way up. You're not going to face the huge thing, but it's your soul giving you a little breadcrumbs to say, follow this. It might scare you a bit.
And you'll grow if you do.
And you'll grow. Yeah. Yeah.
Beautiful. I love that. I'm so glad I've got it on a recording.
Me too. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay. So I'd really like to wind up with what you're working on now and where can people find you and your work.
Yeah, so now, as you mentioned, the game-changing book Blueprint is, I'm actually gearing up for running a challenge, because the biggest thing is I feel like that getting your book out there, getting your voice out there is the biggest personal development. It's the biggest catalyst to growth any person can ever experience. So October is this big challenge that I want to challenge people to write their books within 6 weeks. So you can find that actually the archetype assessment is, if you go to www.meravrichter.com/6AA, you'll get that download to have your free assessment, and then I'll start to post in that in the next few days.
You wouldn't mind posting that in the comments after so people can find it.
In the comments here or in the comments,
on Facebook?
Sure, yeah.
Because nobody can get to Zoom from the Facebook page.
No problem, yes.
Otherwise I would do it. But afterwards it's fine. Afterwards is fine.
Of course.
I just want people to be able to find it, because it sounds a little bit like a bit.ly quote. I mean, a bit.ly link, and I want to make sure they don't go someplace.
Well, and it's true. Merav Richter is not exactly the easiest name to spell.
Well, mine is, your name is simple next to my last name. So,
yeah, I'll take that.
So that's really cool. And all of your books are in all the online retail sellers.
Yeah.
I just want to put a shout out that we can all use reviews, and if you find a book that you really love, please review it so other people will know it's a great book. And they can also find them on that website of meravrichter.com.
Yeah.
So thank you, Merav, for the wonderful hour of story and lessons and sharing. And I always end with a little teabag wisdom quote. And usually the author that I'm interviewing knows more about it. They usually gasp more than me. I get this because we talked a lot about peace, and I believe peace is linked to love and forgiveness. But it's people who love are forgiving. So there is
lovely
your quote.
I love it. Thank you. I love that.
I love it too. So thank you again.
My
And
pleasure.
I hope our paths continue to cross in the air and on the ground and every
I
other
do
place
too.
in the
I
south of
do.
France.
Maybe.
And it was so good getting to spend an hour with you, to
As it
hearing
was
your
for me.
stories and your humor. Thank you so much for being
Thank you
with
so
us.
much, Kathy. Thank you.